Before the arrivals of European colonizer, Africa was a continent rich in spiritual wisdom, ancestral reverence, and deeply rooted cultural identities. But with the coming of colonialism came an erasure, a spiritual war, a cultural genocide. In this video, we uncover how European colonizers stripped away African religion and identity, and why reclaiming them today is more important than ever. Watch and pay attention, and I will share my thoughts later.
Start by just explaining two diseases from which we all suffer, numbing and spala. One is called cognitive dissonance. It is a mental, psychology, it is a mental state of frustration that happens when an individual holds two conflicting beliefs. Now, a lot of Africans, because we have been Arabized and Europeanized, cognitive dissonance is normal. And it shows itself in many ways, self-hate, etc., etc. But I just want to highlight one thing quickly, that each time I say a witch doctor, I suffer cognitive dissonance. Because ngempela ngesintu akuna ngakamlui. Akekho umthakathi mlali. You are either a witch or you are a doctor. But they gave us this name so that they rubbish everything that have to do with African spirituality. So that when you look at it, you just say it's witchcraft kibulo. Another disease I coined in my PhD thesis, and I used joy degree a lot. Please study that individual who's saying as psychologist, and he deals with what is called transgenerational trauma that Africans have suffered. Joy degree, D and then space GRUY. Don't say because you were not there at the point of colonization, you don't carry the pain in your DNA today. You carry that pain as those people suffered it because it is transgenerational, as cut because we have not healed, because we are still under trauma today. Now I've coined it post-traumatic slavery and colonial disorder. I tell African Americans who follow me on Twitter, please don't for a second think that because we were left in the continent we didn't suffer slavery. Sisi suffer more. Because those who've watched Roots, imagine Kunda's parents, they died without knowing who buried their child, what happened to the child. The Kundas were many of the time being dislodged from the coastal cities because of the slave raiders. The person who said our ancestors collaborated, if they did, why did they have a profession called slave raiders who literally came into the continent to abduct slaves? So what Africans were forced to do was uksuka from the coastal cities to run away from the slave raiders. So we were forced to get on top of each other, and the further in we moved, the further the slave traders were coming. Imagine being banned in a village. There's confusion. We are banned to death. Now we are 10 years old. My people are dead. Now it means it's a new identity. Funding hambe to the next village. At the time of another attack. So we have suffered, African Americans, the same way they suffered slavery. But it's in a more so. As we came out of slavery, before healing, we went into colonization, which we are still in it. We have never had a respite. African people have been in pain since 642 AD with the first Arabs who landed on our continent. So, the aim when I prepared was not to elaborate on the diseases. I was just supposed to highlight them and then move on to what I've called in my talk undertones of the message. So as I continue talking, please look for these things that I've called undertones. The first one, surprise, surprise, is by a German called Goebbels. You need to know that man, because he's the father of propaganda, as they're using it against us. Goebbels says propaganda works well when the target of manipulation is under the false guise that they are acting out of their own free will. Is that not the story of Africa? How did we come to post-colonial terminology when we never used decolonial? Since we are decolonial, such a post-colonial. How do each generation, how are they called the born free, who are landless, jobless, no identity? How free are they? How did we agree to that terminology? Now, Goebbels says it works better if the objects of manipulation believe that they are acting out of their own free will. The second undertone I want you to think of as I talk is by Ubabu Nkrumah himself, and it is from his handbook on revolutionary warfare. He says to justify its policies, because they know it's rotten policies, to justify its policies, imperialism has had to resort to all sorts of propaganda types against the oppressed, highlighting and exploiting. I'm adding, there are so-called differences, because for me they are not really differences. Based on religion, I don't know why we are fighting about religion in the first place. Mama Africa are spiritual people. It's a talk for another day. The difference between spirituality and religion is like north and east, they will never meet. But okay, they use that. That's why in Nigeria there are 3 wars going on now, and one of them is based on religion, and it's Boko Haram. So they do that against us based on religion, based on color, who's lighter, who's darker. I've never understood the black skin is the most beautiful skin. Sometimes I am not proud that my father was colored, because I so want that navy. You know, the skin is navy blue. That's the most beautiful skin you can ever have. But they exacerbate those differences where the lighter skinned ones think that they are better than the darker skinned ones. And another undertone, this one is very important, is by a Polish woman called, her surname is Tylus, if I'm pronouncing it right, T-Y-L-U-S.
That's right, ma'am.
Yeah. Uthi, and talks about culture. Uthi, the role of culture in development has been misunderstood thus far, because it has only been relegated to social development. She says, on the contrary, culture is the apex of economic development. All nations that have risen and become great nations have done that because they have a singular unifying culture. The culture is clear, they're united. Look for that undertone as I talk. The last one is to define 4 things quickly. The first one is time frame. I argued in my thesis that Africans shouldn't count time as Abelungu count time, you see. They have BC, which is before Christ, and then some of us call it BCE, before the Common Era. And then they say AD, Anno Domini, after Christ. We say CE, Common Era. But for me, even then, we shouldn't count time like that, because Tina, we never had the Dark Ages. They are our Dark Ages. We only So, I want to link quickly time frame to development. See, there are only 3 races on earth. The rest are nations. Let's not confuse ourselves. You have the Mongoloid race, that's the yellow people. You have the Caucasian race, that's white people. You have the Negroid race, that's Africans. Now, who was the first to civilize? It's very easy. There's a civilization called Kush. They don't deny it. 8,000 years BCE. 8,000 years. Those who calculate can calculate how long ago this is from today. Remember, BC was a countdown. AD is counting up. So we are now in 2018 AD from 180. There are 8,000 BC Kush, the first Kush, because it came again as the second Kush. And then you have Kemet, which is 3,100 more or less. Now, Tina nabo Diop, nabo Obenga, nabo John Henry Clark, we argue that Kemet didn't just descend. It's not possible for any civilization to just start and excel as they did. It was birthed by somebody, and it is Kush that birthed them. But they will not agree that Kush birthed them, because if they agree to that, they are then saying that we were the first to civilize. Because Kush, without doubt, is where South Sudan is today. You can't mistake it. And then let's look at their civilization. The first time they come on the map, that's why Abu Farah Khan, Abu Khalid Mohammed called them Johnny Come Lately. The first time they arrive on the map of the earth is the Greek Empire, 800 BCE. Can you subtract 8,000 from 800? So who civilized white people? Us. White people walked on 4s like dogs and animals. They didn't even know what person must stand and walk. They didn't know. That is why up to date they've got schools, rubbish really for an African, called a finishing school, to be taught how to sit, how to walk. That's why umlungu makahamba ubona ukuthi bahamba so uyabona ukuthi no azange afundiswe. Yeah, because they civilized yesterday. They are not natural people on the earth. They are born by climatic default. It's a fact. The second most populous continent, despite Ma'afa, despite colonization, despite the invention of HIV. By the way, I have a 15 slides on how HIV was invented. It was invented for you. The names are there. If you are interested, get it. So snap out of your cognitive dissonance and know that they are here to kill you. They are not your friends. Now, despite that, we are the second most populous continent, over 1 billion people. Despite the onslaught on our languages, we boast over 1,500 languages. I say over, they say 1,500. I say over, you know why? Because I'm sure they didn't count Isimbondo, they counted it as Xhosa. They didn't count Isimbata, but it is Xhosa. Now, how many of those are out there throughout the continent? Another thing we look like today is that we sit as Francophone, former French, Commonwealth, British, Lusophone, Portuguese, Italian, and Spanish colonization. By the way, it's not just terms, that's how our economies are divided. Nothing happens in Francophone unless Paris sneezes. Nothing happens here, don't fool yourselves. If London says no. He can't do jack, excuse my language, shit, unless London says yes. Now, let's go to how did we come where we are today? Oh, quickly, what is an African? I love Mazrui. Umazrui uti, there's an African by soil and blood. That's us. Uti, there's an African by soil, you just happen to be born here. Now, we really need to start calling out Africans by soil, but they are not Africans. Life is in the blood. If you are not an African by blood, then you are not an African. Now, how did we come here? Because we went through two processes called Arabization and Europeanization. Guys, has it crossed your mind that Islam, Christianity, in fact the Bible, religions, because Judaism, for you to embrace them, you have to stop being who you are. Are you aware? You have to be an African to be a Christian or to be a, that's why they rename you. If in the language you must speak Arabic, Arabic. Yes, that's why Abazalwane go Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Nis, because Abaskulumisis Kuluma Hebrew. Yeah, so wait. Now, another thing that we went through to put us where we are is the Berlin Conference. At the Berlin Conference, I was shocked when I was trying to prepare for the meeting. I was never aware that at Berlin Conference, America was invited. You know they were. They sat in. Do you know who else was invited? The Ottoman Empire. Guys, I said there are two races on earth, the rest are nations. Doesn't it strike you that these two races have already ran a slave trade on us, colonized us at different angles of the time? And that even in the Security Council today, they are there. They had to call China to sit there. I know we love them, but hey, they remain Mongoloid. They are not African. Now, the Ottoman Empire was called because that was the highlight of the Arabs at the time, to sit in at the Berlin Conference. They had a 5-meter map of Africa. No names, except 5 meters width and length. No names. What does that tell you? They had no intention of knowing this continent because the kingdoms were already there. My brother counted them. I don't need to. That map was there because they were clear that they're going to reinvent and remodel, which is what they've done. Now, what else happened for us to land here? When we started gaining the so-called independence, our leaders said we don't want to open the Pandora box. Do away with the borders and whatever. My humble question is, why is it that history got reversed in Eastern Europe so quickly? So quickly. So quickly, but in Africa, no, you can't reverse history. And where they do reverse it like they've done in North Sudan and South Sudan, are you aware South Sudan is smaller than North Sudan? Yes. How does the settler get more land than the Aboriginal, than the indigenous people? Because they didn't use the land of our forefathers, they used the colonization map in the first place to do that. Oti Nkrumah in the handbook, what else has happened to us to be where we are? We have agreed, we have put ourselves at a corner where we say Western parliamentary democracy and the political party system are the only way that we can be governed. Kanjani? Kanjani? How? Yeah. Secondly, we have allowed ourselves to be client states, and we call that post-colonialism. That's us now. We are not talking about the past, Hitler. We have allowed ourselves to get military support. Are you aware, as you and me sit here, how much foreign military is deploying in Africa, people? AFRICOM, USA alone is taking over Francophone countries. I don't know what is your Vuganini. Silwe nini, Wama Africa afunu koka wafunu bulwa. Asfuni bamu. We want to negotiate. They are not negotiating. The militaries are here. I thank Southern African countries because currently they are still saying no. Not in the West and in the East. These people are beginning to own. AFRICOM, Neo-Cheka AFRICOM, Yasa US, Yotongaba, France and the others. Another thing we have allowed to do is to live by aid or handout.
African spirituality is not a monolith. From the Orisha traditions of the Yoruba to the voodoo of the Fon and Ewe people, to the belief in ancestors among the Zulu, Akan, and Igbo, African religion was based on an harmony with nature, community, balance, and reverence for ancestors. There were no middlemen, no single holy book. Gods and spirits were part of everyday life. This was not paganism. It was a sophisticated spiritual worldview developed over thousands of years. When the European colonizers came, the Portuguese, the British, the French, the Dutch, the Germans, they did not just bring guns and chains. They brought religion. Christianity became a weapon, a tool to civilize the so-called savage. Missionaries were often the first wave of colonization. They demonized African gods, destroyed sacred altars, and replaced indigenous belief with European interpretations of Christianity. Colonizers branded African spiritual practice as witchcraft. Colonizers branded African spiritual practices as witchcraft or devil worship. They burned sacred groves, outlawed ancestral rites. They criminalized drumming, chanting, divination, and dancing. Christianity was not just taught, it was forced. Children were sent to mission schools, given European names, and told their ancestors were evil. Generations of Africans were indoctrinated to see their own cultures as primitive and shameful. The spiritual colonization ran deeper than religion. Colonizers erased African identity piece by piece. Language was replaced with English, French, or Portuguese. Names were replaced with biblical ones. Histories were rewritten to elevate Europe and suppress African greatness. What followed was cultural amnesia, where people knew more about Rome and Jerusalem than about their own ancestors. Even across the Atlantic, African religion was suppressed. Enslaved Africans in the Americas were forced to convert to Christianity, but in secret, many preserved their traditions under new disguises. Voodoo in Haiti, Candomblé in Brazil, Santeria in Cuba. These were acts of spiritual resistance, but the colonizer has never stopped trying to erase them. Despite centuries of violence, African spirituality never died. It survived in whispers, in songs, in ritual passed down through generations. Today, we are seeing a resonance. More Africans are returning to their roots, embracing Ifa, Voodoo, Ubuntu, and indigenous wisdom, because reclaiming our spirituality is an act of liberation. When we lose our spirituality, we lose our sense of self. Colonialism did not just steal land, it stole identity. And for many, healing begins with spiritual reconnection. African spirituality teaches us community, respect, balance, and purpose. It is not about going back to the past. It is about understanding who we are and who we were before they told us who to be. The colonizers try to erase us, but we are still here and our ancestors are still working with us. Thank you for watching and bye for now.